Well, we think it's basically a crazy scheme. I wouldn't usually use those words for most policies because most policies have pros and cons, and most policies are a good idea in some way and a bad idea in some way. But I think this scheme is one of the worst I've seen, and basically it risks tons of government money or taxpayer money. It will raise house prices, basically giving a handout to a small subsection or a subsection of society. But it won't necessarily increase access for the people who can't get houses. And worst off, it will probably exacerbate inequality. I mean, renters will see no benefit from this. In fact, rents will go up, but they won't get any extra scheme helping them. So it looks like renters, who are often the worst off people in society, will be made even worse off. I mean, this is the kind of scheme that I can't see a good justification for, except for the political justification we talked about.
Does it even have the risk of a housing bubble?
Well, that's one of the problems. It depends how you define bubble. One definition is just that prices are higher than the competitive market price. And obviously prices are higher than the competitive market price because we have restrictions on supply and we've got boosts to demand because you're subsidising mortgages and so on. But the real risk is of the other kind of bubble, which is something that's eventually going to pop. And I think there's even a risk of that because the government is encouraging firms to take on, lenders to take on more risk than they otherwise would through one of the elements of the scheme where the government takes on some of that risk. The government thinks it's okay because the lenders still have some skin in the game. But if they have less skin in the game, they're going to take more risk. It's not that they're going to take every risky decision, but they're just going to take more risk. And if they're taking more risk than they think is rational, then we risk the exact kind of situation we had, particularly in the US, but in lots of other countries in the past 10 years. Regulations around lending and government influence in the market, as well as perhaps irrational exuberance and misled bankers, led to a boom in house prices which could only pop and crash, and the crash, arguably set off the Great Recession, what we've undergone. So the idea that they would consider this scheme as a good idea, it boggles the mind. It's really one thing that's often said about regulation policy as well as war is that you fight the last war. So the boom that's just happened, you create regulations that stop that bubble from happening again, but may leave another bubble, may create another bubble, or may allow another bubble to occur. But this one seems to allow the very same bubble to occur, even though we just had that experience. So,
yeah, because if you boil down the scheme, it's basically helping people who couldn't normally afford a mortgage. That's basically what happened with the subprime mortgage crisis in America.
I mean, exactly right. That's one of that is the key plank of the scheme, is to try and help people who wouldn't be able to afford a mortgage under the current system. Now, I think these people, if they want to get houses, should be able to afford houses. I don't like the idea that people who are working hard, normal lives, and they can't afford a nice house. But the way to do this isn't to lend them money that banks won't lend them. The way to do this is to build more houses. So that house prices can come down, so that more people can afford houses.
You use strong words when you talk about this scheme, but you're not the only one. There's a strong consensus among economists.
I mean, yeah, it's an almost surprising level of consensus. It's not to do with left wing or right wing. It's not to do with different schools of thought, different universities, different people in the city, people in politics. Think tank economists hate it. City economists hate it. Academic economists hate it. Everyone hates it. It's just a bad scheme.
Yeah.
There is a remarkable consensus among economists. Yeah. One top economic journalist we sent the scheme to said, "I agree exactly with everything you've said," when he sent it back to us.
What do you suggest? Because there is a problem with housing in this country and prices are still historically very high. We had a crash maybe in Ireland, but that never happened here. How do you tackle that problem?
Well, as I said, what I think we need to do is build more houses. And the best way of building more houses is to simply loosen regulations on house building to allow more houses to be built. House builders would like to build more houses. The reason they don't now is because they can sit on expensive land, they can do all these other schemes other than building houses because they're more profitable under the very tight planning regulations which drive a wedge between the price of land without planning permission and the price of land with planning permission. But the only problem with this is that local communities will, depending on where they're built, they will lose out to some extent. So we think at least, is that there should be some sort of scheme that spreads the benefit from new houses, not just on the landowners who get to build them or the house builders who sell them, but the local community as well, to kind of share the benefits of this.
Yeah. What about the new scheme that kicks in the 1st of January? It's basically a guarantee for mortgages. That's probably even more stimulating.
I mean, that's the bit I mentioned being particularly worried about. The guarantee will tell lenders to take risks they otherwise wouldn't have taken because they won't bear the full cost themselves. Now, to me, that seems, it's not just obvious when you study economics and you think about these things and you look at the model and look what's happened in the past and study all of that, do all the detailed work. It's obvious just thinking about it what that scheme is going to do. It risks creating a bubble in houses, a bubble which could pop, which loses the taxpayer billions, which could lead to bailouts, which could lead to another recession. I don't see why anyone would even consider that scheme a good idea.